Lucas had memorized 47 different Sylvari greeting gestures and could pronounce mutually beneficial trade arrangement in 3 regional dialects. But nobody had warned him that the Sylvari Accord's lead negotiator would be the kind of beautiful that made you forget words existed. Velora stood across the assembly chamber with perfect posture, her crystalline skin catching the ambient light and scattering it into patterns that probably violated some physics laws. And those long, elegant ears swept back like she was permanently poised for flight. "Mr. Kane, are you listening?" Ambassador Chen's voice in his earpiece snapped him back to reality. "Absolutely," Lucas lied, refocusing on the holographic display between the human and Sylvari delegations. They were 3 hours into negotiations and had hit their first major snag, mining rights in the Kepler Belt, a resource-rich region both species had legitimate claims to. The Sylvari wanted exclusive extraction rights. Humanity wanted shared operation. Nobody wanted to be the first to blink. Velora's voice, when she spoke, had a harmonic quality that made universal translators sound clumsy. "Your species has been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries. The Accord has maintained these territories for millennia. Surely you see the wisdom in learning from our experience before attempting complex extraction operations." It was diplomatically phrased, but Lucas heard the subtext. "Sit down, children, the adults are talking." "With respect," Lucas countered, keeping his tone light, "humanity didn't survive ice ages and nuclear adolescence by waiting for permission to try things. We're really good at learning by doing. Usually after something explodes, but we do learn." A ripple of something that might have been amusement passed through the Sylvari delegation. Velora's expression didn't change, but her ears tilted forward slightly, a gesture his briefing materials had labeled as increased attention or mild interest. The session broke for recess after another hour of circular arguments. Lucas found himself wandering the station's observation corridors, trying to walk off the tension of sitting still and being diplomatic for too long. Veridian Nexus Station orbited a binary star system, and the view from the outer ring was the kind of thing that made you remember how small your problems were in the grand scheme of things. "The pulsar is 14 light-years away," Velora's voice came from behind him. "But its radiation still reaches us in waves, predictable, constant, utterly indifferent to whether we notice it or not." Lucas turned to find her standing a respectful distance away, arms crossed, staring out at the same view. Without the formal negotiation table between them, she looked less like a diplomatic weapon and more like a person who was just as tired of politics as he was. "Is that a metaphor?" Lucas asked. "Are you the pulsar in this scenario?" "I haven't decided yet." Her ears flicked in what might have been amusement. "Your delegation is more spirited than I expected." "That's a nice way of saying we're stubborn and don't know when to quit." It wasn't intended as an insult. Velora moved closer to the viewport, and Lucas caught a scent like ozone and night-blooming flowers. Stubbornness is an underrated survival trait. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching stars that neither of their species had names for yet. Lucas felt the tension of the negotiations draining away, replaced by something easier. It felt like a shame to waste this moment of actual connection on diplomatic posturing. "You know," Lucas said, aiming for light and friendly, "with how intense you get during negotiations, you'd make a cute wife." Terrifying but cute. He meant it as a joke, a way to acknowledge the absurdity of their formal dance. He expected maybe an eye roll, perhaps a comment about human humor being incomprehensible. Instead, Velora went absolutely rigid. Her skin flashed through colors Lucas had never seen in the briefing materials, crystalline blues shifting to deep purples to something that looked like captured starlight. The environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. Then, quietly, with a weight that made the distant pulsar feel suddenly very close, she whispered, "I accept." Before Lucas could ask what he'd just done, ceremonial chimes began echoing through the station's corridors, deep, resonant tones that he felt in his chest. Velora's eyes were wide, reflecting the binary stars outside, and she looked equal parts terrified and exhilarated. "Oh no," Lucas said, his diplomatic training finally catching up to his mouth. "Oh no, what did I just do?" The emergency meeting in Ambassador Chen's quarters had the manic energy of people trying to fix a diplomatic incident with duct tape and desperate optimism. Lucas sat in the center of the room while 6 human officials talked over each other, their voices creating a chaos that somehow perfectly matched his internal state. Consort's vow is legally binding under Accord law. Can't just retract it without causing massive offense. Does he even understand what he agreed to? "I didn't agree to anything," Lucas finally shouted. "I made a joke. A bad one, apparently, but still a joke." Ambassador Chen held up her hand, and the room gradually quieted. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past 3 hours. Lucas, in Sylvari culture, informal declarations of consort intent are considered the most sacred form of bonding. The casualness is the point. It's supposed to represent genuine, unplanned emotion rather than calculated arrangement. So I accidentally proposed marriage by being sarcastic. Worse, you invoked a binding contract that supersedes almost every other social obligation in their culture. If you retract it now, every species in the Accord will see it as proof that humans don't respect their traditions. The trade negotiations will collapse, and Earth's reputation in the galactic community will be. Chen made a gesture that eloquently conveyed complete disaster. Lucas dropped his head into his hands. "Can I talk to her? To Velora? Maybe we can figure something out together." "She's in formal seclusion. Standard practice for newly bonded Sylvari. She won't be available until the formalization ceremony in 72 hours. 72 hours? What am I supposed to do until then?" "Learn about Sylvari marriage law, apparently," Chen said, sliding a data tablet across the table. "And try not to accidentally declare war or something." The tablet contained more information than Lucas could process. Ceremonial requirements, legal implications, something called neurological bonding that sounded both fascinating and terrifying. But what caught his attention was a brief note about response protocol. According to Sylvari tradition, only someone who genuinely recognized a soul bond would accept an informal consort's vow. Rejection was not only acceptable but expected in cases of obvious misunderstanding. Velora could have laughed it off, could have gently corrected his cultural mistake. Instead, she'd accepted, and by doing so had declared to everyone present that she recognized something real in his careless words. Lucas looked up to find Chen watching him with an expression somewhere between sympathy and calculation. "What aren't you telling me?" Velora is from the crystalline houses, one of the most traditional families in the Accord. They've been opposed to close human integration from the beginning, too much cultural contamination, too much disruption to their social order. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing Sylvari political factions. "Her acceptance of your vow isn't just personal, it's either a massive betrayal of her family's position or," she paused meaningfully, "or what? Or she saw an opportunity to escape something worse." Over the next 2 days, Lucas became an unwilling expert in Sylvari politics. He learned that Velora had been contracted since adolescence to bond with a noble from the Radiant Peaks faction, a political arrangement meant to solidify alliances between powerful families. He learned that consort bonds, once recognized, legally superseded all previous contracts. He learned that 3 previous attempts at human Sylvari bonding had ended in tragic accidents before formalization. That last piece of information came from an anonymous data packet that appeared in his quarters, along with incident reports that read like coincidence but felt like pattern. Gravity plate malfunctions, cargo drone navigation errors, life support glitches. Lucas started paying more attention to his surroundings, the way doors sometimes hesitated before opening, the flicker in his quarters' atmosphere readings. the cargo transport that passed unusually close to him in the station's main corridor. On the third day, he finally got his chance to talk to Velora. She emerged from seclusion for a ceremonial preparation session, surrounded by attendants and cultural advisors, but Lucas managed to intercept her in a side corridor with a combination of persistence and diplomatic credentials. "We need to talk," he said, "alone." Velora's attendants protested, but she dismissed them with a gesture that somehow conveyed both authority and exhaustion. When they were finally alone, her formal composure cracked slightly. "You should renounce the vow," she said quietly. "Claim cultural misunderstanding. The shame will be mine alone, and you'll be free to return to your negotiations without this complication." "Is that what you want?" "What I want is irrelevant." Her ears drooped in a way the briefing materials had described as resigned sadness. "You stumbled into something you didn't understand, and I took advantage of that. It wasn't fair to you." "What if I don't want fair?" Lucas surprised himself with the words. "What if I want to see what happens when we actually follow through, call their bluff, show everyone that humans and Sylvari can actually build something together instead of just negotiating terms across tables?" Velora stared at him like he'd suggested they both jump out an airlock. "You don't understand what you're offering. The bond isn't symbolic, it's neurological. You'll feel my presence in your mind for the rest of your life." "Sounds crowded, but probably better than whatever accidents your family's friends have planned for me." Her expression shifted to alarm. "You know about." "I know enough, and I know running away from this doesn't fix anything, for either of us." For the first time since his accidental proposal, Velora smiled, genuine and unguarded, like someone who'd been holding their breath underwater finally breaking the surface. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Why not both?" The meditation garden aboard Veridian Nexus Station was designed to accommodate 17 different species concepts of tranquility, which meant it looked like someone had let a committee of philosophers loose with unlimited resources and questionable judgment. Bioluminescent plants from a dozen worlds created pockets of colored light, while artificial gravity fields allowed water features to flow in directions that made Lucas's earth-born brain quietly protest. He found Velora sitting beside a pool that flowed upward in a gentle spiral, her crystalline skin reflecting the water's movement in hypnotic patterns. This was supposed to be their last private conversation before the formalization ceremony, away from diplomats and political advisors and the weight of two civilizations' expectations. "I looked up what the neurological bond actually means," Lucas said, settling onto a bench designed for a species with completely different leg anatomy. The briefing materials were thorough, terrifyingly so. "A little. Your people basically share emotions through some kind of quantum entanglement thing the translation software couldn't quite explain. I'll know when you're happy, sad, scared. You'll know the same about me, across any distance." Velora's ears tilted in acknowledgement. "It's more intimate than most humans are comfortable with. Your species values privacy of thought. We see emotional transparency as the foundation of trust." "And I accidentally signed us both up for this by trying to crack a joke." Lucas laughed, but it came out nervous. "What happens if we go through with it and then realize we can't stand each other?" "The bond doesn't create compatibility. It reveals what's already there." Velora turned to face him directly, and in the garden's soft light, she looked simultaneously alien and achingly familiar. "I need you to understand something. When I accepted your vow, it wasn't just to escape my arranged union. In that moment, when you made that ridiculous comment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years of diplomatic service." "What?" "Hope. Genuine, irrational hope that someone might actually see me as something other than a political asset or a disappointment to traditional values." Her voice softened. "You weren't supposed to say something like that. Humans don't typically recognize consort potential. You don't have the cultural framework. But you did, even if you didn't know you were doing it. and I couldn't let that pass without response. Lucas processed this, watching the upward flowing water and trying to organize thoughts that felt as gravity-defiant as the fountain. So we're both escaping something. Me from being just another negotiator in an endless series of negotiations. You from being married off to secure political alliances. Is that so terrible, two people finding freedom in each other? No, Lucas admitted, but it's a lot of pressure to put on what started as a bad joke. Velora's laugh was harmonic and genuine, startling a small hovering creature that had been pollinating nearby. Then perhaps we approach it differently, not as a solemn binding of souls, but as two fools who stumbled into something absurd and decided to see where it leads. I can work with absurd. Absurd is basically my brand. They sat in companionable silence for a while, and Lucas found himself relaxing into the reality of what was coming. Tomorrow, he'd stand in front of representatives from a dozen species and formalize a bond he'd entered by complete accident. He'd gain a partner he barely knew, create a diplomatic precedent that would echo for decades, and possibly make himself a permanent target for the shadow faction that wanted human Sylvari integration to fail. For what it's worth, Lucas said eventually, if I had to accidentally marry anyone, I'm glad it was someone who gets intense during negotiations. And if I had to bond with a human, I'm grateful it was one foolish enough to think jokes are appropriate during diplomatic recesses. We're going to be a disaster, aren't we? Almost certainly, Velora agreed, but perhaps an interesting one. The central court of Veridian Nexus Station had been transformed into something that looked like a wedding designed by committee, which technically it was. Human traditions mixed with Sylvari ceremonies, creating a hybrid event that satisfied neither culture completely, but represented both adequately. Lucas stood at the center of an intricate floor pattern that glowed with bioluminescent markers, wearing formal attire that was supposedly Earth's best attempt at matching Sylvari aesthetic sensibilities. He felt like he was cosplaying as a competent adult. Ambassador Chen stood to his left, while a Sylvari elder named Kane occupied the corresponding position on Velora's side. Between them, representatives from 11 different Accord species watched with expressions ranging from fascination to barely concealed disapproval. Lucas could see the Crystalline House's delegation, Velora's family among them, their body language radiating controlled fury. Velora entered through the ceremonial archway, and Lucas forgot to breathe for a moment. She wore traditional bonding robes that seemed to be made of captured starlight, her crystalline skin luminous against the fabric. Her long ears were adorned with jeweled chains that caught the light with every slight movement, and her eyes, those impossible nebula-containing eyes, were fixed on him with an intensity that made his prepared remarks evaporate from his mind. The ceremony proceeded with appropriate gravitas. Elder Kane spoke in harmonic Sylvari about the sacred nature of consort bonds, while Ambassador Chen offered Earth's acknowledgement of the union in careful diplomatic language. Lucas managed to recite his vows without stumbling too badly, promising to honor Velora's culture, protect their bond, and navigate the stars together in mutual respect and understanding. A phrase that had been workshopped by 3 different diplomatic committees. Velora's vows were in her native language, but the translation software rendered them as poetry about finding unexpected light in diplomatic darkness, about bonds formed in honesty rather than calculation, about choosing partnership over predetermined paths. Lucas found himself genuinely moved, which surprised him given that this whole situation had started with his inability to keep sarcastic comments to himself. Then came the actual bonding, the part Lucas had been simultaneously curious about and dreading. Velora extended her hands, palms up, and Lucas placed his own hands over hers. Her crystalline skin was warm, almost vibrating with some internal energy that felt like touching a tuning fork mid-resonance. Elder Kane spoke a phrase in Old Sylvari, and suddenly Lucas felt something shift in his mind, not painful but profound. It was like a door he'd never known existed suddenly opening, and through it came a presence that was distinctly not him. Emotions flickered through his consciousness: nervousness, hope, cautious joy, underlying fear, and beneath it all a steady determination that felt unshakably solid. Velora's eyes widened as she felt the connection complete from her side, and Lucas knew, actually knew, in a way that transcended words, that she was experiencing the same disorienting rush of suddenly not being alone in her own head. "Is it always this weird?" Lucas whispered. "Always," Velora whispered back, and he felt her amusement echo through the bond before she actually smiled. The assembled witnesses erupted in appropriate ceremonial responses, harmonic humming from the Sylvari contingent, polite applause from the humans, various species-specific acknowledgments from the Accord representatives. But Lucas barely noticed. He was too focused on the sensation of another consciousness brushing against his own, curious and careful, and somehow comforting despite its strangeness. The reception afterwards was predictably political. Lucas shook hands and accepted congratulations, while feeling Velora's fatigue echo through their new bond, as she did the same across the hall. 3 Sylvari ministers from the crystalline houses made pointed exits without offering acknowledgement. Ambassador Chen spent most of the event in intense conversation with Accord security officials, likely discussing the accidents that had been quietly investigated and found to be not so accidental after all. But eventually, the formalities ended. Lucas and Velora found themselves alone in the quarters they'd now be sharing, standing in the middle of a space that had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate both human and Sylvari needs. The room was quiet except for the ambient hum of the station, and through the viewport the binary stars continued their eternal dance. "So," Lucas said, breaking the silence, "we actually did it. We're legally bonded by ancient alien tradition because I made a joke. The most diplomatically significant joke in recent history," Velora added. She moved to the viewport, and Lucas felt her exhaustion through the bond. Not just physical tiredness but the emotional weight of the day, the relief that it was over, the uncertainty about what came next. He joined her at the window, and they stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 people from different worlds literally connected at the neurological level, trying to figure out what that meant for their futures. "I can feel you thinking," Velora said softly. "It's like background music, thoughts I can sense but not quite hear. Is that going to drive you crazy?" "Probably, but it's already less alien than I expected." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "We changed something today, not just for us but for every human and Sylvari who comes after. We proved that our species can build bridges instead of just negotiating across divides." "No pressure, though." Velora laughed, and Lucas felt her genuine amusement through the bond a split second before he heard it. "We're going to have to learn each other," she said. "Actually learn, not just coexist. Our families, our cultures, our expectations. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." Lucas held out his hand, the same gesture that had started all of this in the observation corridor 3 days ago. "So let's be terrible at it together." Velora took his hand, and through their bond, Lucas felt her determination match his own, a shared commitment to making